Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. Let me share with you the cover of the Economist magazine. Is Putin winning? Inside Russia's war machine, for the first time since Putin invaded Ukraine, it looks like he could win. His biggest asset is Europe's fatalism, complacency, and shocking lack of strategic vision. Here's the title of the article. Putin seems to be winning the war in Ukraine, for now. So how is this possible, that people around the world are having this perception? One, there's no internal dissent allowed in Russia. They don't have freedom of speech, they don't have freedom of the press, they're not allowed to protest. Meanwhile, in Western democracies, we are. People do have freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Given the events of the last couple months, the elections in Slovakia, the Netherlands, these blockades on the border with Poland, House Republicans in the United States blocking any kind of votes on Ukraine, yeah, people are feeling it. Day to day, paying attention to the news, not having any bad news for Russia, that really makes it feel definitive that Russia is not winning this war. When in reality, I can talk to you all day about how everything about this war is going terrible for Russia. The month of November was the deadliest month for the Russian military since the full-scale invasion. The Ukrainian military eliminated more Russians in the month of November than any previous month. Mostly because the Russians are conducting meat assaults on the city of Avdiivka. They've been doing this for almost 2 months, and they're not even in the city of Avdiivka. All they've managed to do is gobble up a couple empty farm fields on the north and on the south. And once again, to put this in perspective, the city of Avdiivka is more or less a suburb of the city of Donetsk. Donetsk has been under Russia's control since 2014. This magenta area is where the Russians started in February of 2022. And this is all they've managed to do in 2 years. And really, they've been trying to take Avdiivka for 9 years. So it's Russia's persistence that is wearing down the will of Western democracies. People are impatient. People can be selfish. People are just, once again, looking for an easy solution. So when Kremlin propagandists talk about peace talks and negotiations, saying that's the easy way out, they're hoping people in the West are dumb enough to believe it when there's no peace agreements that Russia would ever adhere to. These wars will never end if Russia can successfully hold on to any territory they've taken in Ukraine. Another reason why Russia is demoralizing the West in their support for Ukraine is the Russian military doesn't care how many of their soldiers die. Russia boosts troop numbers by 15%. Putin signed a decree on Friday boosting troop numbers by 15%. In a move the army said was due to threats associated with the Ukraine offensive. It said the number of serving army soldiers would increase by 170,000 people, and that this was an adequate response to the aggressive activity of the NATO bloc. It's the West threatening Russia, why Russia is increasing their military size. When in reality, Putin's plan is to just keep shoveling meat into Ukraine, no matter the cost in Russian lives, to keep the fighting going, to make countries doubt if sending aid to Ukraine will accomplish anything, to increase the chatter of a ceasefire. Putin is all in. He knows his own life depends on perceptually declaring to the Russian people that they achieved some kind of victory, even if it's just holding on to the land bridge to Crimea. But here's the reality on the ground. Every first-hand account, every picture, every video, the Russians look terrible. Russian troops say they're starving and sent to slaughter according to a new video. Recent estimates suggest that, particularly resulting from so-called meat assaults on the Ukrainian stronghold of Avdiivka, Russian troops are now being killed at rates comparable to World War I. So here's the video with the translation from Anton. Let me read for you a little bit of what these Russian soldiers are saying. I'm not sure who's interviewing them, but these guys just were rotated off the front in Kherson. In fact, we found out that we are now supposedly in Russia, in the Russian Federation. How did we find out? Some servicemen stated to have their accounts blocked by bailiffs. The bailiffs make a request to the Ministry of Defense. The Ministry of Defense responds that we're not in the SMO, and it happens that people stay on the islands in the Kherson region for about 10 to 7 days. They drink from the Dnipro River, eat whatever they can find under their feet. Guys had found 1 can of stewed meat. I talked to people who were pulled out of there. They had found 1 can of stewed meat, cut up a 5-liter bottle, poured water from the Dnipro River, boiled it, added canned meat to it, and drank it in turn, just not to starve to death. We are abandoned. It looks so. Our command provides false information. What do you do to treat people? This is what they're asked. I treat people with medicine at my own expense. I go and buy medicine and syringes at my own expense. They just started providing Promedol not too long ago. That's half the trouble. Each of us who has a military card in our hands can show that. Give me your military card, please. The 3rd page under contract service. Enlisted for military contract service page is blank. It's all blank. Not served in the armed forces of the Russian Federation. A person who is on the front line, who performs combat tasks, gets under bullets, runs under mortars, and his military card is blank. So these Russian servicemen in the Kherson region are complaining about lack of clean drinking water, lack of food. They're not being properly documented that they're serving on the contact line, experiencing combat. This is a small sample size, but I see these videos on Twitter every day of Russian soldiers explaining how bad it is for them, the conditions on the front. And this is some serious 1984 Orwell stuff coming from the Russian government. Shoigu refers to offensive as active defense to lower expectations. Russian Defense Minister Shoigu falsely characterizes Russian offensive operations in Ukraine as active defense in order to temper expectations. This is Orwell's 1984 Newspeak. Because the Russians are so bad at war, they don't want to call it an offensive because that sets the expectations too high. So they're not attacking Ukraine. They're actively defending against Ukraine with meat assaults. So if Russia wants to conduct these meat assaults, these are Russian soldiers that have to be eliminated, whether it's Ukraine on the offensive or Ukraine on the defensive. If Russia wants to slug this out, all of these Russian soldiers eventually are going to have to be eliminated. So Ukraine is digging in as Russia renews its offensive. The shift in strategy comes as the Kremlin sends wave after wave of infantry and meat assaults at the Ukrainian stronghold of Avdiivka. So President Zelensky has given some recent interviews, one to the AP. Ukraine's Zelensky says the war with Russia is in a new phase this winter. So here are some of the highlights, some of the talking points, things we need to remind ourselves as supporters of Ukraine. Ukraine has already done the unthinkable and will continue to do more. At the beginning of this war, all Western intelligence agencies predicted Kyiv would fall within 3 days. 2 weeks tops. And here we are 2 years later, and Ukraine has more territory under their control today than they did a year ago. Zelensky does admit the counteroffensive in the south did not achieve its desired results. There were no goodwill gestures or regroupings from the Russians. In the Kharkiv region, Russia claimed that was a regrouping. In the Kherson region, that was a goodwill gesture to go to the other side of the river. And Ukraine knows that this war might drag on for years. They're preparing for it. Ukraine is becoming self-sufficient in terms of domestic arms production, their own drones, their own missiles, their own artillery shells. They know that military aid from the West might not be dependable if this war goes on for several more years. Attention is key. Anyone capable of keeping attention on Ukraine should continue to do so. This includes all of us, everyone watching this video. Don't stop talking about Ukraine. Don't stop thinking about Ukraine. Don't stop posting and sharing on social media. Because that's what Russia wants, for the world to stop paying attention and just forget all the atrocities they've committed against Ukraine. And this is what's at stake. Give the Kremlin an inch and it will take half of Europe. This is an incredible video from Julia Davis at Russia Media Monitor. So there's Solyov with a guest, and I want to share with you the conversation and interaction they had, because this is very important. It's going to get a little weird. Here's what this man says. Right now, in the West, it's a hot topic that everyone should be forced to negotiate, rather that Ukraine should be forced to negotiate and the Russians will come, because Russia has lost 500,000 men, 2,000 to 3,000 tanks a day are getting burned up. These are fairy tales, but they believe them. They believe it. They have convinced themselves our country is teetering on the verge of a revolution. The fault for this war is completely on our shoulders. We are white people, but don't behave like white people. So for people saying that Ukraine needs to go to peace talks or negotiations, nobody in Russia publicly is asking for them. If Ukraine just wants to surrender and give Russia everything they want, well, Russia would accept that. But as far as give and take, honest negotiations in which both sides don't get everything they want, well, Russia's never going to accept that. Russia at this point doesn't want that. They want to keep actively defending. They want to keep going. So this is where this guy starts talking about white people. This is the beginning and the end of the entire problem, the way Europeans and Americans understand it. White people are dragons, and they dictate from a position of power. We will burn you down, and we will do as we say. Otherwise, we will destroy your entire country and squash all of you. So according to these Russians, they're bears and the white people of Europe and America are dragons. I thought the Chinese were dragons, but he says that apparently Americans are dragons. But in the first 2 days, Vladimir Putin started to talk about peace. The West was looking at Russia with amazement, because they can't understand this mentality. They are white, they have to be like us. Europeans think a white person comes with a sword, and they start chopping one another. And so it goes, all these rats in a big cage, and a Russian bear wants peace. It has a different view. We want the world, preferably all of it, and that's what we're doing. Right now, the Russian Empire is growing back. We're coming back, baby. The Baltics will be next. They say they're getting ready for war with Russia. How long will that take? About 15 minutes. How long can the Baltics last in a war with Russia? So we've gone from Russia saying they can take Kyiv in 3 days to they can take the Baltics in 15 minutes. As I always told everyone when I worked with the Americans in the oil and gas sector, the curse of the Russians is that we are white. You don't understand that we think differently. I agree. I think a lot of people who see the Russians are confused why they don't act like Europeans or Americans, why they don't value democracy and value individual liberty and value human life. So I do actually think this commentator is right, that if the Russians didn't look white, if the Russian people instead looked Asian or looked Middle Eastern, then they probably would have less support in the West, and Ukraine would be supported more. The fact that they do look white gives them access to political parties, right-wing parties across Europe, even some influence here in the United States. Where if they looked Asian or Middle Eastern, they probably wouldn't receive as much leniency from right-wing parties across the Western democratic world. So let's counter it. And I want to give a good example. Here is a Scotsman, goes by the name Pops, and he's a volunteer medic who's been fighting with Ukraine since March of 2022. He drives an ambulance, and I just want to share his message to the West.
Hello, I'm Pops from Scotland. I've been in Ukraine since March 2nd, 2022. I've been a volunteer since then. I've worked for SSO, GUR, and now I'm here driving. Slava Ukraine. So please, European countries, America, give as much as you can. This is a world fight. This is not a Ukraine fight. This is a world fight now. Thank you, Mr. Putin. Hello.
Bless the Scots. So in the meantime, Ukraine is going to continue weakening Russia's logistics, weakening their entire country and economy. Ukraine says it blew up another railway in eastern Russia. So if you remember 4 or 5 days ago, Ukraine intelligence blew up a freight train going through a tunnel. This is a rail line connecting China and Russia. The next day, they struck a different rail line. There was an alternate route going over the mountains as opposed to through them, and they blew up that rail line as well. The attack marks the second phase of a special operation conducted by the Security Service of Ukraine to disrupt the crucial railway line connecting Russia and China. Unfortunately, in my last video, the video I shared was a fake, but this one allegedly is real. This is remote Siberia. In the wintertime, it's pretty dark, so all the videos are kind of dark. But I'll link this down below if you want to see what kind of devastation can be caused when 50 tanks with fuel explode over a bridge. This time, this occurred in Chortov Most. This is what the bridge looks like in the summertime. It's currently winter, but we don't know exactly how bad the damage is. But hopefully, these rail lines, these two, are out of commission, and China and North Korea can no longer ship by rail military equipment and supplies to help Russia's war effort. Russia has announced they've made an arrest of an Italian national for these rail sabotages. Moscow said Friday it had arrested a dual Russian-Italian national for carrying out sabotage attacks. The man, who is 35 years old, placed homemade explosive devices on the rail line, according to the FSB, adding that he was also responsible for an earlier attack on an airfield in the same region. It claimed the Russian-Italian had confessed to having been recruited by Ukrainian military intelligence in February. Is this accurate? I don't think so. I think Russia just wants to look strong by announcing they captured the guy, but more than likely this is a network, and they're going to continue these rail attacks to prevent military aid and equipment coming from the east to Ukraine. Pressure also has to be applied on Russia's revenue sources. Western allies raise pressure on countries helping Russia sell oil above the price cap. So who are the guilty offenders? Western countries are pressuring Liberia, the Marshall Islands, and Panama to do a better job of ensuring their ships don't transport Russian oil above the market cap. So here's the price of Urals oil. This is what Russia is getting. It was going up in September, but thankfully it's coming back down. If we zoom out, we can see this is still not the kind of levels Russia was getting in summer of last year. But we want this $60 price cap to hold. It's coming down, but Russia is still making money from their oil and energy exports. US sanctions 3 companies that have helped the Russians circumvent the oil price cap. 2 of the 3 companies, Sterling Shipping and Straymov Shipping, are registered in the UAE, and a third is based out of Liberia. There's more that the G7, the EU, and the United States can do to put pressure on these companies. They're still making money. They're not giving fair market prices for Russia's oil to risk sanctions. They're making the Russians pay more. But it still has to stop. This is Russia's weak point, and it's possible if the West abandons their support for Ukraine, then Ukraine might start blowing up pipelines, might start going after refineries, going after Russia's income source, because disrupting global energy markets won't matter if the rest of the world is choosing not to support Ukraine anymore. I've talked about this. This is a dark scenario. Let's hope it doesn't get to this point. Ukraine accuses Russia of halting prisoner of war exchanges. At this time, both the Russians and the Ukrainians each have thousands of POWs in their custody. All day, every day, Ukraine would love to exchange their Russian POWs for their own people back, 1 for 1. But this hasn't happened since June. Russia appears to no longer want their own people back. Going back to the beginning of the war, Ukraine has stated that they've exchanged back 2,600 of their captive soldiers in around 50 exchanges. Russia doesn't want to do this anymore. One, they probably don't want to return Ukrainian troops so those Ukrainian troops can give interviews and talk about their treatment. But they probably also just don't want their own people back. If Russians in Ukrainian POW camps are being treated well, are being treated fairly, are being fed, then that's information that might get back to ordinary Russians if they're returned. So Russia appears to be done. Obviously, they could reverse course on this, but we know who the Russians really are. The Russian authorities are reportedly not telling relatives of soldiers that their men have been taken prisoner in Ukraine, leaving Russian relatives of these Russian POWs to find out their loved ones have been taken captive by Ukraine. So the Russians know, most of the time, when their people have been taken captive or died on the front lines, and things are so chaotic or dysfunctional in the Russian military, they're not even notifying next of kin. They're not telling the family members of these men. This is an unfortunate video that's gone viral in the last 2 days. These are 2 Ukrainian defenders in a dugout who ran out of ammunition. So they decided to surrender. They couldn't fight anymore. You can see the Russian soldiers yelling at them to come out with their hands up. As soon as the second Ukrainian defender comes out, they're already on the ground. These Russian soldiers just execute them. This is a war crime. You can't ask someone to surrender, and then when they choose to surrender, you just fill them full of bullets. I'll link this down below if you want to see it, but add it to the list of war crimes from the Russians. This video was geolocated to Stepova. And when these videos get out, when every Ukrainian soldier has a smartphone and access to the internet, this hurts Russia. Why, as a Ukrainian defender, would you ever trust anything the Russians say or do? Why would you ever be tempted to surrender and make the lives of Russian soldiers easier when this is what Russia does to people who try to surrender? This is not a good story, but this is counterproductive for the Russian military. They're pretty stupid. Here's bad news. Ukraine will have to wait for GLSDB. We got the announcement from Boeing and Saab that delivery will be delayed. The claim is more testing is required. I'm going to try and justify this and say the United States wants to make sure that weapons sent to Ukraine are safe and reliable, and they're not going to be shipped until they're proven safe and reliable. This is a brand new design and weapon system, and if it requires a couple more months, we can't really complain. We can't really argue. I'm incredibly frustrated. This should have arrived maybe even 4 or 5 months ago, but early 2024, that's what Boeing and Saab are now telling us. This is good news. Germany hands over new military aid, including vehicles and drone detection systems. This was the package announced from Germany. Some good stuff in here, including artillery shells and sniper rifles. So thank you so much, Germany. This is also good news. Second group of Ukrainian soldiers complete their Patriot air defense training in Germany. About 70 Ukrainian defenders are returning from Germany, and they're going to be coming with another Patriot air defense system. Training has already been completed for one group in the United States. This was in Oklahoma. Another one earlier this year in Germany. So this should be Ukraine's third total Patriot air defense system. Speculation is that this is going to be placed either in Dnipro or Lviv. Final couple feel-good clips. The first one is a drone flying through Kyiv on a winter night. This is a pretty slick video, and it comes from the Instagram account flyukraine_Kyiv. If you want to check out more of his videos, I'll link his Instagram page down below. Final video I have for you is a good one. President Zelensky surprised this elementary school classroom, and one of the boys in class couldn't believe his eyes. That's one of the best Macaulay Culkin Home Alone faces I've ever seen. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.